When I became publisher in 1966, the then general manager and I decided for the first time we should endorse in local candidates and local races. In the past, our predecessors, all family members, but of different instincts about how far to go in political endorsements, were pretty active in state and national politics as far as endorsing goes, but we never had done anything on the state level or below. And Larry Graebner, who was the fellow's name at that time, and I decided that if there's anything a local newspaper ought to do, it should be involved in local politics to the point of endorsing, suggesting local candidates who should be elected. Boone County was a thoroughly Democratic state, known as Little Dixie back in those days, and maybe still, but in some people's minds, though it's changed a lot. And so we decided to endorse. The first race that was coming up was for the state representative from our area. And there was a local Democrat who was sure to be elected. He was a young, upcoming fellow in a politically aware, active family. And there was a Republican who was sort of a stalking horse, I guess everybody thought. He was not likely to be elected, but we interviewed those two people and spent some time with them. And to make this story very short, we ended up endorsing the Republican and gave pretty good reasons, I think, and he got elected. And it was such a phenomenon in local Missouri politics that the St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote an editorial, or wrote a story, noting the fact that the Columbia Daily Tribune had endorsed a Republican. Well, that gave us some hope, although I'll confess that our track record didn't remain that perfect all through the years. But here's the point. First, you have to decide, if you're a local paper, whether to do endorsements. After you make that decision, if the decision is yes, then we have to talk about and learn how to do it. We decided it should be done, the whether question, because as Al mentioned in some of his examples, what more important service can a local newspaper do than try to discuss the candidates for office and what they stand for? Of course, there are lots and lots of discussion of issues that comes in that context. So we thought we should do it. And in our case, we developed a system that I'm sure is unique and impossible for most people to follow. We created an editorial board of one. I just kept growing up and doing this, and since 1966, the editorials have been written by me. And soon enough, after we had discovered that people in the community knew who was writing the editorials, even though we used the disemboweled third-party form, it was quickly seen through. And I decided, and all of us decided, it was a lot better to write in the first person. There are a number of reasons for you who write that you'll know why it's easier to write in the first person. It's much more flexible. You can use the language in ways that I think make a lot more sense, and everybody knew who was writing the editorials anyhow. So in our case, the public could react to the person directly, which they were doing anyhow, and I think it makes a much better connection between the writer and the public for us. Now, most papers probably don't have some guy who hangs around for 75 years writing editorials, which that's an exaggeration, but not much. And so our situation is unique. But once we decided to do it, for good reasons, and many of which Al mentioned, the way you go about it, I think, becomes overwhelmingly important. If you, as the editorial writer, as a newspaper, can convince the public by your example that you are coming at this chore honestly and sincerely, then you can be wrong, you can make mistakes, you can choose the wrong person, and you can appear stupid in some people's minds, but you will be forgiven and not criticized for doing what you're doing. And I think it's the crucial point. And the way that I go about writing local editorials, local endorsements. Our news department does a very good job of working, of explaining to the public what the candidates, where they come from, where they live, what they say in their campaign, what they believe in, the empirical stuff. I use that as my research mostly. And when I then interview candidates, and I interview all the candidates, sometimes I'll have reporters sit in, just as a help for everybody, because they learn something as a form of their reporting, and it helps me then later to know what they think. But the main thing that I do, and I think this makes sense for any form of local editorial endorsing, I'm not there to do a news story, and I say this to people. This is not a news story. Nothing you say here is going to be quoted verbatim. We're just having a conversation so I can get to know you better, and I make jokes about it, and that kind of puts people at ease, I think. I tell candidates, I want to know if you've got any sense, and that kind of thing. And then we have a discussion, and we just get into it, and they, I think, become more at ease. They will talk to you if they think you're a friendly person who's really interested in treating them fairly. I make a big point in every case of commending people for running. I think one of the greatest public service acts that anybody can do is run for office. It's hard to do, that doesn't make you any friends, expensive and time consuming. And I'm sincere in that, and I think they sense that. So then you're on a footing of friendship, if not necessarily agreement on everything. People don't expect that. After all these years, I think they know where we come from or where I come from. And the impression I hope to have created is that I'll be fair. We won't agree, but I'm not going to treat you like some kind of a slum bag. I mean, sometimes people really deserve exposure for doing bad things, and that's usually done in the news, on the news side. And if I find that out, of course, that's enough of a reason not to endorse somebody. But the point I'm making here is this is a discussion, a conversation, not an inquisition of the type that you might expect, where you have somebody sitting in front of an array of bright lights, and you might even have a little club in your hand of some kind. But it's a way to just find out where people come from. At the end of the day, of course, if I think they don't have enough sense to do it, or are bad candidates, I will more likely just leave them out. I won't go through a great long litany of why they're bad, unless they really are. I mean, sometimes people deserve to be called out, but most of the time that's not the case. They're just not quite as quick, smart, aware. They're just not as good. Candidacy is not as good. So I will write in that vein. I think over the years, if a newspaper, even whether it's a single writer or not, develops that kind of a relationship with the community, then the public they know what to expect. Many times people don't agree with me, but I do think that, and I seem to get this feedback, that they think that we're coming at it honestly. And we're trying to do this in a fair way. And if you come in for some people who don't know the process will come in to an endorsement interview in my office, and I can tell they're nervous about it. They feel pretty frightened. And the first thing I want to do is get rid of that. I'm not there to put you on a stand, as I said before. Let's have a talk. I want to know what you're thinking about. And when you say things that make sense, we'll talk about that in that vein. And that really works for us, at least. So, and we endorse in everything that we can think we have any ability to know anything about. We do everything locally in Columbia. I don't endorse in local elections in other towns because I just don't live there, and I'm not quite as aware of everything that happens. We do good news coverage of that sometimes. Occasionally we have such a weird circumstance in a neighboring town that I do write about it. As Jody knows, we've been going through an impeachment process in the neighboring small town of Ashland, which is just ridiculous. I mean, and I can criticize the process and mention the names sort of in an ancillary way without focusing on how stupid the people are. Exactly. So there are times when you can really get into that sort of thing, but I think to rather sum this up and give time for some questions before Amanda cuts me off. I understand Amanda can mute me anytime. So if you want to get rid of me, just give her a high sign. The endorsing is an excellent thing for local newspapers to do. The readers love it. It takes quite a bit of work and time because you need to be fair and honest about it. It's best done, and I think only done, in conjunction with good reporting on the news side. We have been able to separate the news reporting from the political endorsing just by being straightforward about it for all these years. I don't think anybody in Columbia thinks that the reporters check in with me to find out how we're going to treat a particular candidate before they frame their coverage. And in fact, I've learned many years ago through a series of independent-minded managing editors and reporters that if I set foot in the newsroom with intent to tell them how to write X a story or something, I'll perhaps be run out. I don't think I'll be physically harmed because I'm kind of old now and they have some sensibility about that. But the point is that we don't link the two. The newsroom is extremely valuable to me. I get most of my research done for all my editorials by reading the Tribune, among other things. But if our reporting is not the most informative source of information on a particular subject, then we need to do some more reporting. Sometimes we find that out. But I think how many of your newspapers do local endorsing? Are most of them dailies? There's a size factor, no doubt about it. Al alluded to that. But I would like to leave this with you at that point. Ask questions. Let's talk about why and how. And we've done some local editorials on local subject, not candidates, that have cost us millions of dollars. We took a stand on some things that the business community didn't like, and particularly a segment of the business community that withdrew all of their advertising, and put it in the Missourian, by the way. Well, you were kind of there when we were suffering some of that. You ought to have at least one foot in our camp. Well, we do have. You'll notice there's a lot of Tribune people here. And since they began to hire all of our people, they've been able to build this building. And anyhow, I want you all to ask questions. You can see what my approach is more the personal idea, way to go about this. The how part, I've made it clear. I think the weather part is pretty easy. So, Al, you want to have some questions and answers?
I'll have a question, but first an observation. It's ironic, the first time the News Enterprise did an endorsement, they also endorsed a Republican in this Democratic county that had never elected a county judge executive as a Republican, and the guy won.
Good grief, the Republicans are coming on, aren't they?
A question I guess I have is, if you're in a position like I was, or some of the folks in the room are, where you are the newspaper, you're the editor and the managing editor and the reporter too, and you still feel like you need to do endorsements, how do you persuade the objects of these endorsements that you're going to be fair to them in news and still be able to take a stand when it comes?
I didn't come up through the news side. I was an advertising guy, and I have never written a news story. Well, I did write a few once, but I don't think that really is a crucial factor. But I lived in town all my life. How do you develop that kind of a reputation? You just have to keep doing it right, and people will recognize it sooner or later. Yeah.
I was wondering if you invite them for coffee, or every candidate that runs, you have them come to your office, or? Yeah,
they come to the office. I'm going to give them coffee. That costs too much. They come and they visit, and they're welcome. We call them, and they are happy to come. And it's I think one of the things they expect to do nowadays when they run for office, or nowadays ever since 1966. And it's a kind of a part of the campaign. Visit the Tribune.
You do it like the week before the election, or?
Well, we try to do it more than that, give ourselves time to react, to get all around, to talk to all of them at the same time, not be so far ahead that things are going to change too much. So it's in the 3 or 4 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks before. Depends on how many candidates are in the race. Sometimes we'll have way too many. It gets to be pretty serious. That's another thing. It's just pretty serious work because you might have 20 or so interviews, and I spend an hour at least with each one, just talking it over.
Do you have candidates who won't come to meet with you?
Say what?
Do you have like a race where like one candidate won't come to meet with you for
Occasionally,
whatever reason?
not very often, but sometimes it's a person that's not the kind of person that we want to endorse anyhow, and perhaps somebody who knows that, and they just get petulant. And I don't think there's ever been a candidate that's done that that's gotten elected. That's not a very good way to appeal to the public. Yeah.
Hank, what's your kind of overall your track record on picking the winners? Because I have heard a local candidate refer to the Hank Waters kiss.
The kiss of death?
The kiss of death, that one. Yeah. So.
You know, that's a pretty good reputation to have, by the way. The answer to that is you shouldn't keep score. If you start keeping score, then you can't really do this properly. You've got to try to be analytical and objective and fair and all those great things, and not worry about who won, how many won. Now we make these anecdotal stories like Al and I did about the only Republican that ever got elected from a something. Well, that's just a way of suggesting that local endorsements can have some influence. Matt?
Do you find that candidates are usually pretty good about being able to distinguish the difference between your endorsement and newspaper coverage? You know, do they hold it personally against the newspaper sometimes if they're
No,
not
I
endorsed?
think I've never sensed that that the endorsement made them less likely to believe that the coverage was fair. And of course, the secret to that, as you know, is to make the coverage fair. And then I can't do much harm in that regard. I can, you know, and as far as effectiveness, Al touched on this, we can be much more effective on local races. We're more effective on issues than sometimes in personalities and candidates. I don't know of any time in the recent past when my endorsement has affected a U.S. presidential election. There is another little factor here that I got to tell you this. I write an editorial every day. I've done this since 1966, and they're a ridiculous number. And the fact, and I explain to people every single day what should be done, and if people would just pay attention and do what I say, just think of how wonderful this world would be. Well, we'd have everything. I mean, but I haven't figured that part out, that last part.
Hank, as you go out and about in the community, what's the sort of feedback you get from the public on your endorsements? Do they appreciate them, whether they agree with them or not?
They do. I mean, people that know me well enough to talk to me, I think they clearly do. In fact, lately, I guess I'm beginning to soften up. People are beginning to say, you know, I'm beginning to agree with you a little more than I used to. And I always explain to them that that'll be okay if you don't tell anybody. Don't let your friends know that. No, I think that our feedback is very positive about it. Now, some people don't like it, and I have some candidates who have, the worst criticism we get that I think has got some merit is, you didn't pay any attention to me. Sometimes I'll write an editorial and praise or pick somebody, but just not mention some others much that aren't really very strong in my view. But that's not fair. I need to acknowledge that they're there, make a point about I don't have to be, should not be inaccurate or dishonest about what their merits are, but you can do that without being completely ignoring people. There's a lot of personal interaction here with the community and with the newspaper. Yeah.
What was some of the feedback you got on your first endorsement when you had the Democrat running, as you said, in Little Dixie?
Well, I told you the Post-Dispatch wrote a news story about it. It was pretty big. event because the Tribune had never endorsed a Republican for anything. And so here we come. And then, of course, right after that, we start endorsing Democrats. We are not very partisan, except when the one party or the other gets so far off the reservation that they tend to not get as much favorable notice as the other. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, as somebody who came up through the advertising side as you did, and who's had responsibility for the bottom line. As publisher of a small weekly paper, we don't endorse local candidates. And I think back to our last mayor election, we had one candidate was the PR director, ad buyer for a competing hospital. The second candidate was a candidate largely put up by the local hospital because they didn't want the mayor working for a competing hospital. My ad rep, I guarantee you, would get cold shivers if I told her we were going to endorse one of those candidates, which, like I said, we never have. So what would your advice be for a small weekly paper where you have frequently people running for office are business leaders who are also buying advertising?
It's tougher. You know, it was even tougher for us when we were smaller. We had instances when we would, even with news coverage, we would get in trouble like that, of course, when there was a time when people were boycotting grocery stores over things and walking around, and when we would run pictures and stories about that, the supermarkets were really upset, and they would threaten to quit. And when they finally did have a place to go, they did, and that was over a can deposit ordinance issue. It was really became controversial, and we ended up supporting the thing, and all the supermarkets hated it. So, but in your case, I can understand if there is a way to do it, and if you can get through the first whatever period it takes to kind of establish yourself as fair and honest and objective and all that, it's a great readership thing. You do have those particular moments of turmoil and stress with some of the advertisers and others that you might have to. In our case, we've gotten big enough and been doing it long enough, they've just given up on us. And that happens over time. They say, well, they're going to do what they do, and I think they're going to be as honest as they can be. They're dumb as rocks, but we can't change it anyhow, so you get away with it that way. Longevity is really a pretty good thing if you can last long enough. But now, not many people last as long as I have, so I can't recommend that you work until you're 83 or whatever, 85. I don't know what I'd do otherwise. What would I do, Al, if I had to quit?
You'd probably dictate editorials.
Oh, yeah?
Let somebody do the typing.
I'd probably go disappear. I mean, this is fun. Isn't it? It's fun to mix it up with the local town, and you can't do that anymore, surely and seriously, than with local endorsements for public office.
Yeah, it brings to mind Teddy Roosevelt's famous quote about the man in the arena. Today we should say the men and women in the arena. You know, that the praise and attention should not go to the critics, you know, who sit on the side, but to the people who are in the arena.
Yeah.
But when you endorse, you're getting into the arena just as much as you can. And I think that people ought to respect you for having the courage to do that.
And I think I mentioned the respect that I should have, and anybody doing this should have, for the people in the arena, for the people running for office.
Absolutely. One of the best points you made was telling them up front, thank you for running. You know, we really need people to make democracy work.
Yeah, and then right after that, you get into discussions. You have disagreements about issues. If you can keep it about the issues and not the people, unless the personalities really deserve. I mean, there are some bad people, you know. I don't think you should ignore that, but I think you get the gist that I've been coming up with. Are there any papers? You mentioned the fear of endorsing in small papers. I don't sense that there are many publishers here. Okay, and there are some publishers. Good old. So what do you think? You did this when I asked if you endorsed.
Oh, we endorse a lot of questions that come up on ballot issues and things like that. And I've endorsed when I was in Iowa, a much smaller paper for the presidential race and some local races. But it's a real slippery slope. I'm a news guy at heart. I have to do advertising because that's part of the beast. But it's tough to, these are people that you sit with at Rotary every week and with the chamber events and downtown and at luncheons and after work at the local pub and things like that. So it's,
You can do pretty well at the pub. Stay away from Rotary Club. You'll be all right.
I have a rule, always had a rule in covering politics. Anything said over a drink is not for publication.
Oh, absolutely. If there's a drink in your hand, it's off the record. That's what the
I
publisher
say
told
the
me.
same thing in these editorial interviews, and I suggest to them that every one of their stupid comments or golden words will not show up in a news story. If you say something that I think is worth a news story or worth following up, you'll hear from our news department, and you'll know what the situation is. You can make that separation if you just keep it in mind, don't you think, Scott?
Absolutely. Hank's one of the best bosses I ever had because he never once told me what to do.
Well, I should have, of course, on certain occasions.
That's a mistake, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's some items of neglect that I regret, but I'm going to quit anytime you want me to, but I mean, I'm getting paid for a certain amount of time.
I have one more question about how you interview. When you do your interview, if you don't mention anything that was said, what do you say? You just endorse them and don't.
Oh, I do. I mention
don't have a
these.
reason? I mean-
I mention where they come from. They know that their stances and and something that might be indicative of where they stand on issues. I will paraphrase, let's say, or just say, Sam thinks that we ought to sell the fairgrounds. Well, that's fair enough. But if it gets to the point where it's clearly a thing that ought to be a news story, well, it's pretty easy to not report something that they otherwise. I want them to be candid and start and tell me, and pretty soon it happens if you just talk to people. And you can kind of see how I would go about it from watching this silly presentation I'm making now. And you just get into a pretty, and I've had more than once, which is good, some people who were very skeptical and actually enemies, did not like, they thought, me or the newspaper, and they came in with this kind of an attitude, And by the time it's over, I've had several people say, this is not as bad as I thought. Isn't that the right way for it to end up? Mm-hmm. That didn't mean I endorsed them, but it just turned out to be a relationship that they could accept. And if you don't have that at the end, then you've just destroyed the communication is gone and it won't work.
Hank, one last question.
Thank you.
I think the local races tend to be nonpartisan, and as you go up the ballot, they're almost exclusively partisan. And the break point for me is a state House of Representatives race, which is by definition partisan, but it's really a local race. And I wonder if you've had any experience with partisan difficolties there, because we live in a pretty partisan era.
Well, I think the answer to that is to be an independent forever. And we endorse regardless of party. We always, of course, mention that party can be a factor, but that's not the primary thing. And we're in the same way that you suggested. Local politics is nonpartisan. When it gets to the county level and beyond, it is partisan. But we just treat it the same. The party label does not become the main thing until you get up far enough where the people are apparently, obviously beholden to the party line. We'll start mentioning that.
And that is increasingly true farther down the ballot these days, unfortunately, as more money gets into these campaigns and the state committees, sometimes even national committees get involved in electing local legislators to state legislatures.
Columbia's pretty good about resisting the influence of out-of-town money. We have some in-town money occasionally in recent years. It's gotten a little bit into the picture, but that occurs from the at state offices and on up. Really, not so much for even county offices, though they're partisan. But I don't think we care much whether they're Republicans or Democrats. They do a good job.
And you always endorse in these legislative races?
Yeah.
How far up the ballot do you go?
Up?
How
Why,
far?
we go all the way to the emperor, if there is one.
Okay.
We endorse everything. As I mentioned, we don't think we actually can elect a president, but no, we do them all. Now, I don't get the presidential candidates in my office.
But
But
when
state,
you were in Iowa, you might have, right?
Yeah, actually, during 2007 and 8, I interviewed over the phone or in person, every single candidate that announced and carried any kind of campaign, all the way down to the small ones, all the way up to McCain and Hillary and Obama and everybody. And we only endorsed for the Iowa caucus, but that was the great part of being a journalist in Iowa during a presidential election, is you get to see those guys trouncing around around with the farmers and in the pubs and in the little diners and at the cattle auctions and things, and they're more than happy to give you some time.
you guys rigged
Absolutely.
that up, and they've rigged it up in Iowa so they get that done. I mean, I can't arrange that in Missouri.
In Iowa, Obama would always be willing to give the local newspaper time for an interview. He would, put the Des Moines Register and smaller papers off because he knew the local weekly laid in the living room all week, and that if he paid the respect to our paper, that's what you want your paper to be known as, our paper, by giving them an interview, that reflected well on him. And he did better in rural Iowa than expected. And it's one reason he won the caucus and one reason he's president today.
That's a good point. Good politicians pay attention to the media. Teddy Roosevelt was one of the champions at that. I mean,
There's a great book about that right now.
yeah,
about,
the Bully
Doris Kearns
Pulpit.
Goodwin.
It's a good book.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm halfway through it, which has taken me about a year and a half.
I'm only about 30 pages through.
No, let's say I'm 12 pounds into it.
That book is called The Bully Pulpit, and it's about Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and
The Golden Age
and
of Journalism.
muckrakers, and the Golden Age of Journalism.
And that was the McClure's Magazine story, which is probably one of the best examples of journalism. Are you standing up for a reason? You want me to get out?
I'm
get to
hungry,
leave?
Hank, I'm hungry.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.